Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about the impact of the federal government shutdown and federal policies in general in Pennsylvania. But first, we're joined by Jim Lee, President and CEO of Susquehanna and Polling Research. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Francine. Good morning.
As we begin to consider next year's race for governor, how do you determine when is the appropriate time to start following public opinion of these races?
Well, we'd like to start a year in advance just to get an early snapshot of what the electorate is thinking. And the reason that's important is we already have a Republican candidate that's been given the endorsement by the Republican State Committee. So we know that there's already a very important matchup between Shapiro and Stacey Garrity, the GOP presumptive nominee. So it gives us a chance to get a sense of what the race looks like now, so that when we do polling closer to the election, we can really see the changes over time in terms of where the race is going.
Let's take a look at two separate matchups. First of all, for the race for governor, Josh Shapiro comes in at 54%, Stacey Garrity at 36%, 9% are undecided, and 1% other. So what do you take from these results?
So the first takeaway, Francine, is that we have a situation in Harrisburg where we still don't have a state budget. We're over 3 months overdue from the June 30th constitutional deadline to pass the budget. And the first takeaway is that you can infer from this, because Shapiro is leading Garrity, that the budget impasse isn't hurting his reelection chances, because if he's up by 18 points, that suggests voters really aren't, making their feelings known on this question and actually influencing their answer on this particular question, because he's leading. So it doesn't look like the budget impasse is hurting Shapiro, when the Republican Senate and the Republican Party has been trying to blame Shapiro for the impasse by saying that he's not coming to the table, that he's off doing high-profile events in other states, that he doesn't really care about Pennsylvania anymore. But this result suggests that's not true. Shapiro has a solid lead here, and I think that has to be taken as, for what it's worth.
Now, you'd already noted this. Stacey Garrity announced her candidacy well over a month ago. She's already received the Republican State Committee endorsement over a year in advance of the race. Does that give her an advantage?
Here's why I think it certainly gives her an advantage. In this poll, Shapiro is getting 92% of the Democratic vote. So the Democrat vote is basically all but committed to Shapiro. But among Republicans, Garrity's getting 75% of the Republican vote, but Shapiro is getting 14% of the Republican vote. That's important because in the 2022 election, with Mastriano running against Shapiro, the reason Mastriano lost that race is because the exit polling that was done after the election showed that Shapiro was able to peel back 16% of the Republican vote from Mastriano. That's about what Shapiro is getting now against Garrity. But Garrity has a lot of room to grow, because a lot of Republicans and voters in general are still getting to know her and learn more about what she represents. Our poll shows that a significant block of Pennsylvanians still don't have an opinion of her, because it's still a year out from the election. So as Republicans get to know her, some of that support among Republicans that Shapiro's getting in this poll will probably go back to Garrity. So while Shapiro leads now by 18 points, I fully expect this race to tighten and tighten considerably in the coming months.
Let's look at the next poll question. This is another matchup for the race for governor. Once again, Josh Shapiro comes in at 55%, Doug Mastriano at 37%, 7% are undecided, 1% other. How would a primary contest between Stacey Garrity and Doug Mastriano affect the race for governor?
You know, this result suggests that Mastriano is doing equally as well against Shapiro as Garrity is. And that might surprise some people because Mastriano lost that race 4 years ago by 15 percentage points. And there's a lot of people in the Republican Party that believe he is too damaged to really be a credible candidate this time around. This poll suggests that he is doing equally as well. But the problem for Doug Mastriano is, does he have room to grow? More and more Pennsylvanians already have an opinion of him, and some of them have a negative opinion from the race 4 years ago. So unlike Garrity, it's tough to see a pathway for Mastriano because more and more Pennsylvanians have already formed an opinion of him, so they're not likely to change their opinion, whereas Garrity is still getting known by the public.
Let's look at two more poll questions very quickly. I'd like to do these back to back. They're both regarding the death penalty. The first question, how much do you trust government to apply the death penalty fairly? 5% say completely, 19% say a great deal, 19% a fair amount, more toward the middle, 25% only a little, 26% not at all, 0% not sure. And I'd like to go directly to the other poll question, a similar topic. What punishment do you believe is most appropriate for people convicted of murder? 38% say life in prison with no possibility of parole. 12% life in prison with a chance of parole after at least 40 years. 8% life in prison with a chance of parole after at least 20 years. 29% say the death penalty. 8% not sure. 4% other, and 1% refuse to answer. What do the responses of these two questions tell you about the importance of this issue in the election, not only this year's judicial retentions, but perhaps more importantly, next year's midterms?
Right. Those questions were sponsored by the Atlantic Center for Capital Representation and Pennsylvanians Against the Death Penalty. And collectively, what they show is that support for the death penalty, which used to be really strong at one point in the past, is not where it is today. More and more Pennsylvanians are having concerns about the way the death penalty has been applied and implemented, because in your first question, only a combined 43% of Pennsylvanians, if you add up the percent that said completely, a great deal, or a fair amount, only 43% trust the government on some level to apply the death penalty fairly and appropriately. The remaining 57% say they only trust the government only a little or not at all. That suggests more Pennsylvanians have concerns about the way the death penalty has been implemented in the past, which explains why Governor Shapiro has followed in the footsteps of Governor Wolf by putting a moratorium on death penalty cases, because he's concerned that the death penalty is being applied discriminately. And that's a reason why the moratorium is in place.
We've been speaking with Jim Lee, President and CEO of Susquehanna Polling and Research. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are former Congressmen Phil English and Mike Doyle. The federal government shut down on October 1st. You've both lived through past shutdowns in your tenure as congressman. Does anything stand out as different or concerning in our current situation? Phil English, we'll start with you.
Oh, yeah, let me start. I think that this is an unnecessary shutdown, but there are real issues involved. And unfortunately, the way this is playing out, the two parties and the four conferences are so far apart that it's going to be very difficult to find a way to restart things. There's really literally no dialogue. This is clearly a shutdown being driven by the Democrats and specifically, in some respects, the Senate Democrats. Every Republican has voted for a simple, clean resolution, continuing resolution. And in the Senate, a block of Democrats have effectively blocked the continuing resolution going forward. I think something has got to give in the next 10 days. This is damaging to the country. There are programs like WIC that are not being funded temporarily, and that's a problem. There are many federal employees, including air traffic controllers, that are working without pay. So this is a real stress to the system. In my view, I think there is a way to work it through, but the problem is what is being demanded by minority leader Schumer uh, is an extension of COVID funding rather than broader subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And that's a very difficult thing to take subsidies scheduled to be phased out and extend them without talking about how to pay for it or even a long-term game plan.
Mike
Well,
Doyle,
I'd probably take a different tack to that. Probably back when Phil and I served together, this would have already been solved because back then the leadership in the House and Senate get together and they work this out. The problem here is you have a House of Representatives that votes get decided by one vote, and there's a element in the House Republican caucus that doesn't want to spend any money or fund any programs. Now they got the bill out of the House by one vote, and it comes up to the Senate. Every Democrat had a chance to vote against this bill, which gives tax breaks to people at the very top of the income scale in America and uses the money that's saved by clawing back the premium tax credits to help pay for it, not in its entirety, but partially. So the idea that you would vote for a bill that gives tax breaks to wealthy people and then tell working Americans, these are the working poor in the country. These aren't people without jobs. These are people that don't qualify for Medicaid because they make more than $20,000 a year, but yet they don't make enough money to be able to afford health care. So if you're a working person full time and you make $30,000 a year, under the current law, you get a premium subsidy, a premium tax credit that goes directly to the insurance company, and it writes down the cost of your insurance so you can afford it. This expires. It has expired. And unless it's renewed for another year or extended permanently, like the Republicans did with their tax cuts, then those working Americans, working poor, people making from like $20, $30, $40,000 a year, are going to be left without insurance. Now, there's an easy fix to this. Phil said there's a block of Democrats that block it. Every Democrat but three. It started with two and now there's three. Never had a chance to vote against this bill. And so now they're voting against the bill. But this is simple. They went to the White House, asked for a meeting with the president. The president flat out told him he wasn't going to negotiate with him. What he's done instead, which is really making this difficult to solve, is now he's threatening blue states by saying that he's going to cut federal funding from any state that has leadership on the Democratic side, and that some of that might be permanent. And instead of furloughing federal workers who would be brought back and get their back pay after the shutdown, he's talking about firing them. These things make it very difficult to come back to the negotiating table when there's no trust. You can't get a deal with the Senate Republicans only to find out that the House Republicans won't vote for it, or that the president will come out on Truth Social one night and blow the whole thing apart. So I think, this trust isn't there. Nobody wins in a shutdown. I mean, Phil and I both agree shutting down the government is a terrible idea. And you don't do it unless you have no choice. But the fear on the Democratic side is if they don't take a stand for people's health care, a lot of people in this country may go uninsured, and there's just no guarantee with the White House and the House Republicans that they're going to go along with extending the premium tax credit. So it's a stand that I think they have to take. I hope it's brief. The solution to this is to get them all back at the White House, Senate leadership, House leadership, and the president. And when President Trump and House and Senate Republicans say we've reached a deal and we all agree to it, whatever that is, and there'll be negotiation, then that's when the shutdown will end, because there's certainty. Right now, there's no certainty that people's health care is going to be protected.
Mike, what do you make of the narrative that if Democrats get what they want, that will be funding health care for illegal immigrants as well?
Well, you know what? That's very disingenuous, because that's absolutely a lie. There's a small group of people that are called legally present that are here, like there's DACA kids, and there's people that are waiting their asylum hearings. They're in the country lawfully. That's the small group of people that would still receive funding under this bill. The idea that every illegal immigrant is going to get health care in the country, that's completely false. And that just makes it tougher to build trust when you have those kind of statements coming out of the vice president. We know that part's not true.
Well, I think we need to nuance this a little bit, because after all, there are situations where non-citizens do get funding, even though they are not eligible for Medicaid, and that is when they show up in the emergency room. Now, here's the problem: if hospitals provide that coverage, that cost has to go somewhere. So if there isn't the opportunity to provide a reimbursement for emergency services, that creates a cost that gets socialized into the system. So I think there is an argument that there needs to be an adjustment here. Some states are making adjustments using their own funds, but I think that's a topic worth having an actual discussion on. That. Now, here's the point, and here's where I need to correct my colleague a little bit. The Obamacare ACA subsidy is still there and is continued. The part that was not being continued is as an additional premium through the tax code that goes through insurance companies and provides an additional subsidy that was put in place because of COVID conditions. That was set up to expire. That was set up to expire when the Democrats were in the majority. And as it expires, the costs that we are seeing that have built up in the system are now going to be potentially showing up on premiums. I think that's a fixable problem. It's more of a year-end problem, although the re-upping is going to be occurring starting in November. So Democrats have a point in saying this has to be addressed before the end of the year. But this is a pre-existing problem reflecting healthcare rising costs that were inherited by the current administration and were covered over. This is what we're arguing about here is an additional program that ultimately would cause roughly 2 billion people out of 340 million in this country to fully lose their benefits. And people in the $20,000 or $30,000 range aren't the ones that are going to be hit by this. This is typically for more affluent people, potentially up to $600,000 in income. I mean, I'm the co-chair of a practice group in a major law firm, and arguably I qualify for the subsidy, and that's just wrong.
I think a lot of that needs to be corrected. First of all, as far as the fact that they were expiring, the tax cuts were expiring too, and the Republicans had no problem making those permanent. But yet, when the opportunity came to make the premium tax credit permanent or extended, that was not a starter. The idea that, I mean, this subsidy goes to people who make over 100% of poverty, but less than 400% of poverty. For a family of four, that's $120,000 up at the top. But let me tell you about people I know. I know people in my own circle of friends that has a son who makes $30,000 a year He's self-employed, so no employer health insurance. He has to go into Penny, which is the Pennsylvania site, and get his health care. His premium currently with the subsidy is $3,600 for the year, $300 a month for the year. He just got a notice that the premium he's going to go from $300 a month to $700 a month. This is someone making $30,000 a year, and he's going to drop his insurance because he can't pay $700 a month. So the idea that this is going to add to the deficit, the tax cuts that the Republicans extended permanently added 3 point some trillion dollars to the deficit. And nobody blinked an eye on that. So it just strikes me as odd that when we're talking about cutting taxes for wealthy people, there's the deficit has nothing to do with it. But when it comes to giving benefits to the working poor in this country who are working, and their health care, this is a matter of life and death, then that's a big problem with the deficit. One last thing, the dish payment that Phil referred. This is where hospitals get reimbursed if they provide care to people that don't have insurance. Can you imagine that if an undocumented comes into an emergency room with a life-threatening, he's shot or whatever the situation is, but he's going to die if he doesn't get medical treatment, that now these doctors have to decide whether or not they want to treat this patient because they're not getting reimbursed? I mean, the press secretary for the president was asked that question specifically, and she refused to answer it. She kind of sidetracked it. So it just seems to me to be a no-brainer that in this country, we help people that are down on their luck. We help people that are working hard, but still aren't making enough money to pay their bills or get their health care. And that should be the priority, not giving tax cuts to people like me and Phil that don't need the extra money. And that's at the crux of where the Democratic position is that let's negotiate, just sit down with us and give us a guarantee that the premium tax credits are going to be extended. Now, are they going to be made permanent? Maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe they get extended for a year, and we have a chance to revisit this in a year from now. But right now, there's no guarantee that if we agree to reopen the government, that this situation is going to get resolved, because I don't believe there's enough votes in the House Johnson's going to have trouble with his caucus if this comes back to add this into the budget. He's going to have a revolt, and he's not going to want to do it. But it has to be done. This is a battle that I think has to be fought, and I think this is why you're seeing Democratic senators hold firm on this. They can take a vote every day for the next 2 weeks. The result's going to be the same until we get a negotiation with the president, with the Speaker of the House, and with the Senate leader. That's when this will end.
I just disagree with the way you've characterized this, but I do agree that I think in the end it is going to take a negotiation. By the way, just for the record, what the BBA did, the largest part of that tax policy was just extending current tax policy. That's where you come up with the idea that it was tax cuts for the rich. In fact, it was tax cuts for every class of taxpayer. And that's really basic, and we can argue that as much as you want. The fact is, the thing that probably provided the most relief for the wealthy, quote unquote, that was in this tax bill was an expansion of the SALT deduction, under which a comparable taxpayer in, say, Swickley ends up paying a lot more federal taxes than a taxpayer in Midtown Manhattan. So bottom line, I think that, we can argue till the cows come home, but I don't think we should be holding up the appropriations process over reconciliation, which already passed. You guys could have had the votes to extend a number of things when you were in the majority, and it didn't happen. In fairness, the Republicans could have acted when they had their majority to extend the tax policy. 10 years ago, they didn't think they had to, but they should have. They should have made some of those changes permanent so that we're not constantly gaming the tax code.
Yeah, well, I would just say that the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan office, I know some people say it isn't, but it is. They analyze the House bill, and the tax break, wealthiest households in the country would see approximately a $12,000 increase from this legislation. Uh, and middle income families would see somewhere between $500 and $1,500, and the poorest people actually are going to see a $1,600 decrease. That comes from the Congressional Budget Office. Those numbers aren't numbers I'm making up. So I think there's nobody that believes that this tax bill that was extended, and okay, they extended current law. Well, the premium tax credit is current law. And the Democrats want to extend that too, except we weren't able to get
It
that
was
done
scheduled to phase
in the
out.
bill.
It was
Well,
it was
so with
intended
the
to
tax
phase
cuts,
out.
the tax cuts were
No,
scheduled to
no,
phase out too.
no, no.
Of course
The
they were, Phil, because the
sorry, the
Republicans
premium
kept saying,
tax cut was a COVID measure to deal with COVID conditions. What you are conflating is the underlying subsidy, which is built into the ACA, into Obamacare, which has not been in question, is not being challenged. We're talking about the extra program, and that was scheduled to
yeah,
phase out. We're not going
and
to have
and the
Obama.
tax cuts were scheduled to phase out too, Phil.
10
If
years ago, they were not made permanent. You've got that point, but that
same
has,
thing.
no, it isn't. It is completely different. Well, by the way, one other thing for anyone who is interested, if you want a take on the distributional effects and the growth effects of these tax changes, visit the Tax Foundation's website. I'm on their board. They do a good job. They are considered objective, and they have real models that they use to model these things.
Let me jump in. I want to read a brief quote that was in Axios on October 3rd. It says, quote, President Trump is seizing the government shutdown as an unprecedented opportunity to consolidate control in the Oval Office, accelerating a trend toward unchecked power. Trump has spent his presidency methodically erasing the independence of institutions that once served as checks on executive power, end quote. Your thoughts?
I think there are legitimate concerns that have been raised about how executive power is being levied. I fully expect, that terrible Supreme Court that is so much criticized from the left, probably to hand down some decisions that restrain executive power. I think there are some real issues here about the approach of this administration to posse comitatus, how they are deploying troops in city settings. I believe that federal troops, for example, it is appropriate to use National Guard to defend federal facilities and federal activities, including ICE. But I believe there has to be collaboration with local officials. I don't believe in sanctuary cities. I think cities that have set up that status have created real problems for themselves. But I also think that local municipalities have a real say about what happens within their borders. Washington, D.C. is different because it's a federal city. I think that there is going to be probably a real confrontation over Chicago and some other cities, Portland. But I think there are legitimate concerns about where the lines are going to be drawn. I'm comfortable that the courts are going to draw them.
Well, let me agree with my colleague Phil on that. Uh, I hope, maybe I'm not as confident as Phil is, but the Supreme Court's going to be hearing these cases, and there's going to be some decisions made on what are the limits of presidential power. We don't have kings in this country. We have elected officials that are accountable. We have a president that instructs his Justice Department to prosecute people he doesn't like because there's political enemies. He puts it right on Truth Social. He says to Pam Bondi, "Hey Pam, what's the delay here? Why aren't you prosecuting Adam Schiff? Why aren't you prosecuting Letitia James? Why aren't you prosecuting Comey?" Right on the. I've never seen anything like this in my life, that a president directs his cabinet to prosecute people because he thinks that those people did something bad to him. The Supreme Court really needs to give us some clear definitions on what this president or any president moving forward can do. Because right now, this is the strongest executive branch we've seen in my history that seems to. Now, there's a myriad of court cases, but every time he does something, somebody sues, and this goes through the court system, and then there's appeals, and it takes forever to get decisions. But I think finally Phil's right. A lot of the most important cases are going to go in front of this session of the Supreme Court. My fingers are crossed that we'll return to, a check and balance system where we have three co-equal branches of government, none more powerful than the other, and the checks and balances that make our democracy work.
We're going to continue our discussion in just a moment, but first let's give our guests a brief break while we look at what PCN is covering this week. Later today on The Issues, we'll have Luke Bernstein, the President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. He's at 7 p.m. Right after that, we'll have the Chamber's annual Business and Industry Dinner. Retired U.S. Army General and former CIA Director David Petraeus and former NBA All-Star Shaquille O'Neal will be our featured guests. That's tonight at 7:23 p.m. On tomorrow's Capitol Preview, the topic will be Pennsylvania's spending and business. Greg Moreland, the State Director of the National Federation for Independent Business, and Bernie Gallagher, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center, will be our guests Tuesday live at 9 a.m. On the Issues has more candidates in November's general election for you to meet on Wednesday. Stella Tai, Democrat for Pennsylvania's Commonwealth Court, will be here at 7:30. That's followed by Matthew Wolford, Republican, for that same court at 8 o'clock. Finally, Michael Wojcik, Democrat for retention on the Commonwealth Court, will be at 8:30. Now on to the history and culture side of programming. Explore the life of Johnny Appleseed, the man, the myth, with author Howard Means on Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Here's a flashback from this year's Pennsylvania Farm Show. It's the annual square dance contest. Young and old do the bidding of the caller while raising a cloud of dust on Sunday at 9:30 p.m. PA Books explores the history of Philadelphia sandwiches with author Mike Medeo. That's Sunday at 7 o'clock. The football game of the week is Bethlehem Catholic taking on Parkland, courtesy of Service Electric Network in the Lehigh Valley. They kick off Friday live at 7 o'clock. The girls' soccer game of the week will be Central Columbia versus Shikellamy on Saturday at 5 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Check out our streaming service, PCNSelect.com. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's get back into our discussion. We were talking about the federal government shutdown, but alongside that, the state budget is also over 3 months late at this point. Have we ever been in this situation before?
Both my colleague and I used to work for the state Senate, and back in our day, this didn't happen. I remember one year under Governor Casey, we drifted for about a month, and I think neither of us were paid. And we were some of the only folks in the government that weren't being paid because we worked for the state legislature. I believe what is going on now in Harrisburg is a serious problem. I believe that there needs to be some common ground. I will confess to you, I have not immersed myself in those issues, but my view is that Pennsylvania needs to find a way to build up its reserves and also continue to create a favorable jobs climate. And so that's going to dictate some of what happens. The budget situation, I think, is sufficiently flexible that they should be able to do it.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. Back when we worked in the state Senate, it's different today. Some might say, well, the old ways didn't work, but back when we first got into Congress, when we worked in the Senate, the two sides got together. Both parties had an incentive to pass the budget because there were things in that budget that would help their districts. And so, they had a vested interest in seeing it passed. Social media and just yet, this conglomeration of all these different websites and podcasts and what have you, And then you mix that together with a legislature that has a 1 vote margin, or a 3 or 4 vote margin, and it's a prescription for nothing happening, because the extremes in both parties hold these parties hostage sometimes, if they cooperate or negotiate or compromise with the other side. Uh, it's very tough. And then in Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro is tremendously popular. He's has higher approval ratings than I've ever seen any governor have. And but we've got a legislature that the Democrats control the House, and the Republicans control the state Senate. There's again. I think Phil agreed with this. They have to do it the way it used to get done. You sit at a table and you work these things out, and each side has to give something. Nobody gets everything they want, and you reach that compromise, and you sign the bill, and you move on. I don't think the American people or Pennsylvanians, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, like the idea of their two parties constantly at each other's throats. I really don't think that's what they want. They want to see us work together. And Phil and I had a great relationship when we served together in Congress. When I chaired the Communications and Technology Committee, I never let a bill out of my subcommittee that didn't have a Republican co-sponsor. Because if you want to get things done, you have to work with both parties. I think that's what people would like to see. And I think both parties bear some responsibility to do that.
What impact do you see a government shutdown having on public perception of these elected officials? And in particular, do you see this having a longer-term impact on the midterms?
Yeah.
Couple of comments. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of polling out on this recently. I've seen 4 or 5 different polls in the last 2-3 days. There's a KFF poll that basically the majority of people blame the Republicans for this shutdown. Now, it's overwhelming amongst Democrats, independents, but even some Republicans. But these aren't polls that I made. This is like 4 separate polls that come out, I think, 2 days ago, and more recently a KFF poll that just come out to say, and people are concerned about the health care, and a lot of people don't know about it yet either. That's the other scary part. In that survey, they asked them, "Are you aware of the fact that these premium tax credits and more than 30-40% of the public doesn't even know this is happening?" But right now, no, that could change in 2 weeks. But I'm saying the polling I've just seen in the last 2-3 days, and I'm sure you've seen it too. It's been all over the news. Shows that the Republicans and the president in particular, they actually blame him more than they blame the Senate Republicans, is responsible for the shutdown.
Well, that's just a reflection of his exposure, frankly, and people don't understand exactly the process. They don't know that every Republican in the House and Senate has voted to keep the government open, and it's a minority in the Senate that has actually blocked the appropriation going forward. My theory on the polling is that people have not really studied this yet. They haven't really had the opportunity because they're busy. And the polling is going to encourage Minority Leader Schumer to continue on his current course. I think that would be a mistake. In terms of the impact it's going to have, if this is resolved relatively quickly and blows over, I don't think it will have a big impact on next year's election or on the attitude toward the parties. In fact, if it's quickly resolved, it may actually become a win-win situation. I think in the short term, it has given a lease on life to congressional Democrats that have had horrible polling, their worst polling in history, because of a perception by Democrats that their leaders aren't fighting for them. It will create the impression that House and Democratic senators, sorry, House and Senate Democrats are taking an active role in pushing back on Trump, and that's kind of understandable. My sense is that it's only going to be if there is a serious outcome here that is damaging to the country. If something happens during this shutdown that causes real damage, does so visibly in our 24/7 media, then I think that there could be some lasting damage. When Mike and I were freshmen, Speaker Gingrich precipitated a government shutdown and took the brunt of it. And Republicans ever since have been on the defensive on government shutdowns. And in the early polling on that, it was not unfavorable to the Republicans. So my view is that this has yet to play out, and we can't predict what the consequences are going to be.
Yeah, I agree that it's still too early to say what the final consequence will be of this. But I'll say one thing about midterms. They're generally a referendum on the president that's in office. And right now, the Republican Party controls the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court. I mean, they have it all. The three branches of government are all controlled by one party. I think people don't like what they're seeing from this president. That it isn't the job of the president to punish his enemies or to withhold federal funding from blue states because he's mad at them. I think you're going to see a change election in the midterms, which wouldn't be unusual, by the way. Trump won in the midterms. We took back control of the House of Representatives. I think the Senate's a little tougher battle, but that's going to just come down in the end. Do people want to see a check and balance on this White House? And I think that's going to be one of the driving factors in the midterm elections.
Mike, are you satisfied with how congressional Democrats are responding to the president right now?
Yeah, you have to stand up to bullies. This guy's a bully, okay, and it's how he operates. It's been how he operates his whole life in his business and as president. And if you continue to allow someone to do things that I think are legally questionable out of the White House and to talk about weaponizing the Justice Department, I mean, he got rid of the U.S. attorney who didn't want to prosecute Comey because he didn't think there was that ample evidence to do so. So what did he do? He fired him and put his personal attorney in to seek the indictment. I mean, these are unprecedented moves by a president. And if the Democratic Party's not going to push back on it, I think that's why you saw when Schumer agreed to that continuing resolution last time, he got a lot of blowback on that from Democrats that's saying, hey, why you keep folding to this guy? Somebody's got to stand up to this bully. And I think the Republicans or the Democrats are doing that, but they're doing it on the behalf of working poor in this country. Those are the people really, you get up every day and they go to work and they're trying to feed their families and pay their bills, send their kids to college, have a pension, have health care, and they're struggling right now. And the idea that we would allow a budget to pass that doesn't address their problems, not the problems of people with salt on the East Coast and West Coast, rich states, but people in middle America and middle Pennsylvania, rural America. These people are really struggling right now. The tariffs are killing farmers all across this country. And they want to see a government address those problems. And I think that's where the priority should be. So, yeah, I'm glad they're pushing back. I'm glad I'm not there, but I left 3 years ago. But I'll tell you what, I was just thinking, how would I be reacting if I were still in the Congress? I'd be reacting pretty much the way my colleagues are.
Politics is a contest of ideas, and I think the biggest challenge for the Democrats is coming up with a coherent response to what is going on that will actually offer the constituencies Mike was just talking about real relief and real opportunities. In fairness, they haven't done it so far, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. The problem is knowing that there are creative, very thoughtful people among the House and Senate Democrats who have at different points pushed ideas with broad support. Those people need to be out front if the Democrats are going to pick up momentum. In terms of the midterms, the Democrats don't have to offer a coherent alternative. As Mike pointed out, sometimes the voters show up, and if they're angry about what's going on and they've forgotten about what the last administration was like, they may very well vote no, and there's a lot of precedent for that. But I think that the Democrats are only going to have sustainable forward motion if they come up with credible ideas that break the mold, that address core problems like housing, like inequality of wealth, without just raw redistribution, and approach the idea of growing the economy. The abundance agenda that is coming out of one faction of the Democratic center left offers a fair amount of promise. But unfortunately, congressional Democrats have had trouble getting out in front and responding. One last point. There are a lot of concerns about lawfare, but they are on both sides of the aisle. And while Mr. Trump was out of office, he was on the receiving end of what a lot of people feel was disproportionate treatment. Everyone can decide for themselves who's been treated unfairly and what the circumstances are. But I think the party or the movement that comes forward with a credible approach of restoring law enforcement and the higher reaches of our legal system to a nonpartisan, credible stance that enjoys broad support within the country, I think will do America a real service.
I'd like to talk just briefly about political violence before we run out of time. As we all know, Charlie Kirk was killed in a public appearance last month. Minnesota Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were attacked earlier in the year. Governor Shapiro's residence in Harrisburg was set on fire. Do you think that the incidence of political violence is increasing since the two of you served in office? And if so,
Yes.
why do you think?
Yes, for a variety of reasons. I think it is a breakdown of the political culture. Another example of a form of political violence was the murder of the United Healthcare executive, which took place in New York a year ago. What America is experiencing has only been experienced a few times in the life of the Republic, around and about the Civil War, the end of the 19th century. I think that it is going to require a new civic movement and also reuniting people around common purposes to turn this around. Mike?
Yeah, yeah, and I think of the '60s and I think of the Vietnam War too. But Phil's right. I think a lot of this has to do with social media. People, they watch this, the algorithms that get amplified, that keep putting it back, and they come down these rabbit holes, and they get very angry because they think something is happening that really isn't happening. The QAnon guy that shows up at a pizza shop in Washington, D.C., thinking he's going to liberate children that are being held in the basement from these pedophiles. And he walks into a pizza shop with an AR-15, and there's no basement, and there are no kids down there. I mean, a lot of this phenomena that we're seeing are people that watch these, these, whether they're podcasts or social media, and they start to believe something that isn't true, and they get angry about it, and they feel like they need to do something about it. All these cases, there's never, ever, ever an excuse for violence, ever. You can dislike a person's politics, and in America, the way you do that, you debate, you talk about it. You make your points and let the other people make their points. You don't shoot your enemy because they're saying something you don't like. And this whole thing about speech too. I chaired the communications and technology department. We battled on Section 230 whether or not we should have some legal door for these companies that amplified an algorithm that caused damage or harm, whether people would be able to escape the protection of 230 and bring cases to court. I mean, and this wasn't about conservative speech or liberal speech. This was about damage because somebody intentionally, people like to watch car wrecks. And when you have a business model that says the way you make money is to keep eyeballs on your site, you see lots of car wrecks on these places. And I think this is a real problem. The idea of speech that people can be fired for what they say. I agree that if someone says something and it goes against a company standard and they're saying, well, this is not the standard we have for our employees, that they can let that employee go. But the federal government, the federal FCC, has no business whatsoever telling late night comedians or anybody else in this country what they could say, or they're going to shut down a TV station or close down, media. That's not the government's responsibility. But I think we could all need to sit back and reassess where we are in this country, that there's so much anger and that there's so much division, and that we can't sit down like Phil and I did many, many times while we served together in Congress. Some of my best friends in the United States Congress are conservative Republicans. My dearest friend was Tom Coburn from Oklahoma. He's deceased now. But a lot of people had a hard time understanding how Tom Coburn and I could be friends. Well, we weren't friends because of our politics. We canceled each other out, I think, every time we voted on the House floor. But we found common ground on other things. And I just think, we need more of that. We need more personal interaction. This digital age where everybody's working with their thumbs instead of with their eyeballs in their mouth like we're doing right now. People would never say what they say on the internet if they were standing face to face with you. And that's a problem, unfortunately. And the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't have a good answer for it. But I think, the rise we're seeing in violence is a result of what's happening in social media.
That will have to be the last word. Unfortunately, I apologize. We are out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, former Congressman Phil English and Mike Doyle. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
PCN recently spoke with Elizabeth Hoffreiter, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Independent Schools, on how the budget impasse impacts private schools.
Welcome to our program. How do private schools fit into the annual state budget?
Well, that's a great question. So first, let me say that I represent the independent schools. And the reason that's important is that independence is right there in our name. So we're independence in mission, we're independent in our governance, and for the most part, we are independent in our funding, receiving most of our funding through tuition and through donations. But there are limited funds from government sources. And in the state of Pennsylvania, we are lucky that some of those are for professional development and materials. So that is one way that our schools, especially our smaller schools, are dependent on that funding.
You mentioned materials and professional development. Can you talk about what some of those examples may be?
So it's really interesting with professional development. There are federal funds called Title II funds that are based on a number of students in our schools that allows for the continued development of the professional growth for teachers and for leaders in the school, which is so important. And when that money comes to the state then allocates it to the learning associations. And right now it's held up in the state budget. The materials, in some cases, actually textbooks or science materials are the materials that we're talking about. And a lot of our heads of schools have been talking about the fact that they can't order new ones until they know what's actually going to be in the budget. So they're using old resources.
Now, the state budget has been at a 3-month impasse, and I know you mentioned they've been using old resources. How is this affecting independent schools?
Well, really, it's just a time of uncertainty. So should they go ahead and buy new things if their own individual school budgets allow or not? I think Dr. Carrie Rowe said it best when I was at the last Board of Education meeting. It's causing compounding effects. And obviously the effects on the public school are far worse than the way we're being affected in our independent schools. But there's a feeling of, I'm not sure where this funding's coming from or when. And even when it is approved, Dr. Rowe reminded us that there might be a lag in actually getting that funding.
What impact does this impasse have on the education of these children?
Well, I think I can say in the independent schools, very little effect is on the children because teachers, whether it's independent, private, parochial, public, are in the profession for the sake of learning and for the sake of the children. And they're not going to let the budget impasse change that. I know very good teachers in every system who could make do with just about nothing and make sure the students in front of them are learning. However, that feeling of uncertainty, that questioning of what is coming down the pike definitely affects the well-being of the adults in the room. And those children benefit from that one caring adult, and we need to take care of those adults as well.
We've been speaking with Elizabeth Hoffreiter, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Independent Schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss state spending and business. Our guest will be Greg Moreland, State Director of the National Federation for Independent Businesses, and Bernie Gallagher, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center. That's tomorrow live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.